German Shepherd K9 puppy was found trapped in ice. Then an unlikely hero stepped in. He was barely 4 months old. A purebred German Shepherd K9 puppy, bred for greatness. But instead of training with a handler, he lay helpless, trapped in a block of ice on a frozen lake, his paws bleeding and his cries barely audible through the howling wind. Everyone assumed he was already gone. But just as hope vanished, someone appeared. Not a rescuer, not a vet, but someone you'd never expect. What happened next will leave you speechless. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. Now, prepare to be moved by a story of survival, courage, and a bond that defied all odds. Per Gunter A.O. ChatGPT, the morning sun was deceiving. It painted the sky over rural Minnesota in golden hues, casting soft reflections over the still-frozen lake. But under that glimmering illusion of calm, the air bit at the skin with ruthless cold. The wind, sharp and unforgiving, swept over the surface like a warning. No one should have been out there. Not that morning. Not with the temperature still below freezing. And yet, something stirred beneath the frozen crust of Lake Porter. A whisper, a whimper. It was faint, almost too soft for the human ear, but it was there. A cry. The ice groaned as it shifted, responding to the subtle weight pressing against it from beneath. Then another sound. Not the wind, not the ice. It was a cry for help. Desperate, raw, alive. The German Shepherd puppy had no name. He was born in a police breeding program, the smallest of the litter, with ears too floppy and a bark that never quite sounded confident. The others had already been assigned to handlers, their futures mapped out in K9 divisions across the state. But this pup had been marked for evaluation, and while the others had been loaded into clean vans headed for warm kennels, he had somehow gotten separated. A gate left open, a gust of wind, a chase after a bird, and just like that, he was gone. The cold hit fast. The snow swallowed his scent, and the thin ice, invisible to a young pup's curiosity, had betrayed him. Now he lay half submerged, one paw frozen under the surface, his breath forming tiny clouds of vapor. His body trembled. His tiny claws scratched weakly at the ice. His eyes, golden brown and pleading, searched for something, anything, but there was no one, until a figure appeared on the edge of the lake. It was easy to miss him at first. A man wrapped in layers of worn flannel and a faded army jacket. His beard was scruffy, almost white. His steps were cautious, deliberate. He wasn't jogging. He wasn't ice fishing. He wasn't part of any rescue team. He was just walking. His name was Clyde Mathis. Most people in town called him Crazy Clyde. He'd lived in a cabin outside the county line for more than 20 years. No one really knew much about him. Some said he'd fought in a war. Others claimed he'd been rich once, a banker who'd lost everything. But to most, he was just the old man who collected firewood and talked to the trees. Clyde paused as he approached the edge of the lake. Something in the air didn't feel right. He adjusted his scarf, squinting toward the shimmering expanse of white. And then he heard it. A cry. Faint, barely there, but unmistakable. Clyde's breath caught in his throat. "Hello," he called out, his voice cracking from disuse. "Is someone out there?" Nothing. He scanned the surface again, and then he saw it. A tiny shape, dark, unmoving, just far enough out from the shoreline to be unreachable without crossing the ice. It was the pup. At first, Clyde thought he was looking at a lump of fur, maybe a coyote that had fallen through. But then it moved, barely. A paw twitched, a nose lifted, and eyes locked with his. Clyde's instincts kicked in, not the instincts of a trained rescuer, not even those of a dog owner, but something deeper, something human. He looked around. No one. He didn't carry a cell phone. There was no one to call. No time to waste. "Hold on, little one," he muttered, more to himself than the pup. He spotted a long branch near the tree line. Then, with deliberate care, he stepped onto the ice, testing each step before committing his weight. Every crunch beneath his boots sent a shock through his chest. The pup whimpered again, louder now. As if the sight of another living being had reignited something inside him, Clyde moved forward. One step, then another. The ice held for now. He inched closer, heart pounding. "That's it," he whispered. "Keep looking at me." The dog's eyes didn't move. They followed him with unwavering focus, a silent plea etched in pure trust. Clyde finally reached a distance where he could extend the branch. The pup was too weak to move. His little body was half encased in a thin layer of ice that had begun to refreeze around him. Clyde lowered to his knees and slowly, carefully slid the branch forward. "Bite it," he whispered. "Come on, boy, just bite it." But the pup didn't move. Clyde could see now how bad it was. One paw was completely trapped under the surface. His fur was crusted with frost. His breathing was shallow. Clyde had a choice. He could go back. He could run to town, call for help, maybe find someone with the right gear. But by the time he did, the pup would be gone. Or he could risk it. Clyde gritted his teeth. He hadn't run toward danger in years. Not since the accident. Not since the life he'd tried so hard to forget. But something in that dog's eyes, it called him back. Back to a version of himself he thought was long buried. Without a word, Clyde dropped the branch and crawled forward. The ice groaned. He pressed flat against it, spreading his weight. The pup let out a weak sound, not quite a bark, not quite a cry. It was enough. Clyde reached out. Their hands, paw and palm, met. The contact was electric. Gently, using the warmth of his hands, Clyde began to melt the ice around the dog's leg. His fingers stung from the cold, but he didn't stop. Bit by bit, the ice gave way. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, with a trembling motion, the puppy's leg came free. Clyde didn't waste a second. He scooped the pup into his coat, wrapping him against his chest. The dog's heart was faint, but it was there, alive. The return across the ice was slower, more perilous. Every step was a prayer, but Clyde didn't let go. And when he finally reached the shore, knees shaking, lungs burning, he collapsed in the snow, the pup still cradled in his arms. For the first time in years, Clyde wept, not for the past, but for the fragile, frozen thing it saved, and the part of himself he had just reclaimed. Clyde stood in the doorway of his cabin, the wind howling behind him as he cradled the trembling bundle wrapped in a thermal blanket. The dog's body barely moved, just faint, involuntary twitches now and then, as if his muscles were remembering how to feel again. But it wasn't the frostbite or hypothermia that haunted Clyde most. It was the brand. A tiny tattoo, etched in dark ink along the inner thigh of the pup's rear leg. K9-0734MN. Government issue. Police property. Military grade. Clyde had seen those markings before, a long time ago, in another life. They weren't decorative. They were identity tags. Proof that this dog wasn't just bred for companionship. He was trained, or meant to be, for service. Tracking. Defense. Obedience. But this pup had been left to die. Who let this happen to you? Clyde murmured as he gently placed the puppy on an old folded towel near the wood-burning stove. He'd already started a fire the moment they got back. The cabin now radiated with a steady warmth, the smell of burning cedar filling the air. He crouched beside the pup and opened a thermos, pouring a few drops of lukewarm water into a saucer. The pup's tongue moved instinctively, lapping weakly. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Clyde watched the steam rise from the kettle. His mind raced. He hadn't spoken to anyone from town in weeks, and even then he'd kept it short. He liked his silence. He'd earned it. After years of loss, regrets, and dishonor, silence became his shelter. But now he had a choice to make, because this wasn't just a rescue. This was government property. And someone out there was going to come looking. Clyde leaned back in his chair and looked at the little creature curled up by the stove. The dog's fur was beginning to fluff out again as the frost melted away. One eye had crusted partially shut from the cold, but it still blinked slowly, watching Clyde, trusting him, against all logic. That trust stirred something painful in Clyde, something buried. Years ago, a decade, maybe more, he'd worked on the military K9 project. Briefly, he wasn't a trainer, not exactly. more like a handler liaison, tasked with monitoring behavioral responses in animals with potential trauma. But things went wrong. There was an incident, a scandal, and Clyde had refused to lie about what he saw. So they pushed him out, and he let them. The door to the past slammed shut, and Clyde had never tried to reopen it. Until now, his eyes drifted to the small tag again. K9-0734MN. The MN stood for Minnesota's training facility, one of the coldest, most intense programs in the country. If this pup had come from there, then something had gone seriously wrong. Clyde stood, pacing now. The pup stirred slightly at the motion, letting out a barely audible whine. "Easy, kid," Clyde said gently. "I'm just thinking." He grabbed his old laptop from a shelf and wiped the dust off. It took 3 tries before it powered on. The internet signal was weak, borrowed from a ranger tower miles away, but just enough. He typed the code into the search bar. Nothing. Then he tried again, this time accessing an archive handler forum, using an old login he didn't know still worked. It did, and that's when he saw it. A recent post from a former trainee. K9-073 for missing during transport. Snowstorm incident. Presumed dead. No further recovery efforts planned. Clyde's jaw tightened. Presumed dead? No efforts? They had written him off. A 4-month-old pup, left in the snow, labeled lost property and forgotten. He slammed the laptop shut. Anger rippled through him, cold and sharp, not because of the bureaucracy that he expected, but because he knew what that kind of neglect did to the soul. He'd lived it. He returned to the stove and sat down beside the puppy. "You're not just a number," he said softly. "Not anymore." He stayed there until the pup fell into a light sleep, breathing more evenly now. His tiny body curled against the towel, tail twitching now and then. The next morning, Clyde named him Ash, not because of his coat, which was more golden tan than ash-colored, but because of where he'd been found, pulled from the frozen lake like a glowing ember inside a dying fire. Fragile, but still burning. For the next few days, Clyde did everything he could to nurse Ash back to strength. He boiled chicken and rice, smeared healing balm on cracked paws, carried the pup to the edge of the porch and back, so he could slowly learn to walk again. Each day, Ash got a little stronger. Each day, the bond between them grew. And yet, Clyde knew the clock was ticking. The moment he'd looked up that tag, the system would have pinged his location. Maybe not directly, but anyone truly looking would find him eventually. And when they did, they'd take Ash back. Or worse, they'd put him down. Because the moment a military candidate failed to meet the physical standard or disappeared during training, the program considered him unfit, a waste of resources. And Clyde wasn't about to let that happen. Not again. One snowy morning, while Ash was finally strong enough to follow him around the yard, Clyde made a decision. They wouldn't wait. They would leave. He packed only what he needed: dried food, some cash, a small tent, and his emergency satellite phone. He had a friend across the state border, a woman named Joanna, a retired veterinarian who now ran a sanctuary for working dogs deemed unfit by the system. Ash could start a new life there. Safe, free, but fate, as Clyde had learned, rarely cooperated with plans. That night, just as he was sealing up the last of his gear, a pair of headlights appeared on the edge of the tree line. A black SUV, unmarked, government grade. Clyde's blood froze. He scooped Ash into his coat and killed the lantern. But it was too late. A voice echoed from the vehicle. "Mr. Mathis," it said calmly, almost casually. "We know you're in there. Step outside with the animal." Clyde tightened his grip on Ash. The pup whimpered softly, not from fear, but confusion, trusting his human to fix whatever was wrong. Clyde's hand hovered over the back door. He could run. Or he could do something he hadn't done in years. Fight. The cold punched Clyde in the face the moment he stepped outside. Ash bundled against his chest under the folds of his heavy coat. Snowflakes danced like ghosts under the pale moonlight, and the trees stood silent, tall, shadowed witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. The black SUV didn't move. Its headlights beamed through the dark like the eyes of a predator. Then, After what felt like an eternity, the driver's door opened with a soft creak. A man stepped out. He wasn't wearing a uniform. No badge on his chest. No gun visibly holstered. Just a black coat, tailored and long, with matching gloves and polished boots that didn't belong in the woods. But Clyde recognized the posture, the deliberate walk, the calm in his eyes. Military. The man approached with quiet authority, stopping just short of Clyde's porch. His voice was low, even. "Mr. Mathis?" Clyde didn't answer right away. His fingers curled tighter around Ash, who stirred slightly but didn't make a sound. The pup's breathing was steady, his body trusting, unaware of the storm building in Clyde's chest. "Who are you?" Clyde asked, his voice a gravelly warning. The man tilted his head, his breath steaming between them. "Let's not play games. You accessed a restricted database 3 nights ago. K9-0734MN. That alone puts you under federal scrutiny. But we're not here to make trouble. We just want the dog." Clyde's jaw tightened. "The dog has a name." "I'm sure you gave him one," the man said, without emotion. "But to the program, he's a lost asset and property of the state." "Property?" Clyde echoed, venom in his tone. That property was left to die in a lake. The man didn't flinch. "Accidents happen. He's 4 months old." "He's also defective," the man replied coldly. "Didn't meet the early benchmarks. Failed bite pressure tests. Poor response in simulated fire zones. You were in the program. Mathis, you know what that means." Clyde stepped off the porch slowly, snow crunching beneath his boots. "Yeah, I know exactly what that means. It means a scared pup was dumped during transport, and no one gave a damn, not even a search party." The man took a careful step back, as if assessing Clyde's growing fury. "Look, you're clearly emotionally involved. I get it, but that dog was never yours. You had no right to interfere. I had no right." Clyde barked. He was half frozen in a hole in the ice. "You all walked away. I didn't." There was a pause. Then the man reached into his coat. Clyde's instinct surged until he saw what the man pulled out. A file folder. Thick. Labeled in red. K9-0734MN. Terminated/non-redeemable. "I'm being generous," the man continued. "This pup's future is already stamped. If you let me take him now, maybe I can convince my superiors to place him in a low-priority shelter. He won't serve, but he won't be destroyed." Clyde didn't move. His heart hammered against Ash's back. The pup stirred, sensing the tension. His eyes slowly opened, peeking out from the coat. "You're lying," Clyde said quietly. The man's eyes flickered. "You're not taking him," Clyde added. The agent sighed. "I was hoping this wouldn't go the hard way." Then he turned and whistled. The back door of the SUV opened. A second man stepped out. Taller, thicker, wearing tactical gear under a snow parka. A scar ran down his left cheek. His presence was enough to shift the air, cold and threatening. Clyde backed away slowly, stepping behind the porch post, shielding Ash. "Don't be stupid, Mathis," the agent warned. "You're alone. We're authorized to retrieve the asset by force if necessary. No judge will listen to an old dropout in a cabin with a stolen government dog." The words stung. Not because they weren't true, but because they were the exact words Clyde had told himself for 10 years. Dropout. Failure. Forgotten. But now he wasn't alone. Ash let out a low, growling noise from inside the coat. It was soft, more like a vibration, but Clyde felt it against his ribs. The pup wasn't just afraid. He was defending. Even now, even after everything. Clyde looked down into those golden eyes and made a choice. He turned, kicked open the back door of the cabin, and ran. The agents shouted. Footsteps thundered through the snow. But Clyde was already inside, grabbing his backpack with one hand, still cradling Ash with the other. He burst through the kitchen door and into the woods behind the cabin, a hidden trail he'd cleared years ago when isolation felt like freedom, not survival. The snow was thick, the moonlight patchy through the trees. Branches whipped against his arms as he ran. Every breath burned. Every step risked collapse. But Clyde didn't stop. He ran for Ash. And maybe, Just maybe for himself, too. Minutes passed like hours. Behind them, flashlights bounced through the forest. Voices called. Commands echoed. But the agents weren't familiar with this terrain. Clyde was. He'd lived in these woods longer than they'd been alive. Still, he couldn't run forever. Finally, he reached the edge of a ravine and slid down its icy slope, cradling Ash to protect him from the impact. They hit the base hard, but safely. Clyde lay still for a second, panting. Then he looked down. Ash was still in his coat, still breathing, still alive. A distant voice called out from above the ravine. "Mathis, this won't end well. Give us the dog and we walk away." Clyde yelled back, his voice hoarse. "He's not a dog. Not to you. Not anymore." There was silence. Then retreating footsteps. Clyde stayed frozen for another 5 minutes, just in case. Then he finally moved, crawling into the crevice of an overhanging rock. He lit a small emergency lantern and opened a blanket. Ash crawled out onto his chest and collapsed in a curl of fur and warmth. Clyde pulled the blanket over both of them. For now, they were safe. But only for now. Clyde moved before the sky even began to shift. The darkness was still absolute, the kind that blurred the trees into one giant mass of shadow. Snow fell again, soft at first, but thickening with every gust. It was a kind of storm that erased trails, silenced sound, and buried mistakes. It was perfect. Ash shivered under Clyde's jacket, pressed tight to his chest as they climbed out of the ravine together. Clyde had wrapped him in a thermal scarf, securing him snugly like a child. The pup didn't complain. He had stopped complaining since the lake. He simply watched Clyde with those soft eyes, as if memorizing every line of the man's face. Joanna's message still burned in Clyde's mind. "They're coming. I have a place. Move before dawn." Clyde had no doubt she meant every word. He hadn't seen her in years. Not since she left the state program under circumstances even messier than his. But if there was anyone who understood what it meant to save the dogs no one else wanted, it was Joanna Reyes. She had taken them in. Dogs who had failed by thresholds. Dogs who had flinched during gunfire. Dogs who had simply frozen during exercises and were deemed too soft for duty. To her, they weren't broken. They were just misunderstood. And if Clyde could get Ash to her, maybe, just maybe, he'd have a chance at something real. The forest thickened around him. Snow fell heavier now, caking his eyebrows and weighing down his coat. He kept his compass in one hand, though his fingers had already gone numb. Every few steps, he had to stop and adjust his footing. More than once he slipped, slamming a knee or shoulder against a tree or the frozen ground. But he never dropped Ash. By the time the sky began to lighten in the east, Clyde had covered nearly 4 miles. And that's when the first drone passed overhead. It wasn't loud, just a subtle, high-pitched hum. But in the silence of the woods, it sounded like a siren. Clyde froze. He ducked beneath a cluster of spruce, tucking Ash tightly beneath him as the drone hovered, scanned, then zipped away. He waited. 10 seconds. 20. Then moved again. The Say house Joanna had mentioned was another 5 miles east, near the base of an abandoned fire tower. It wasn't a house. Exactly. More like a repurposed ranger shed she converted into a winter shelter. No plumbing. No signal. But heat, protection, and distance from the grid. That was all Clyde needed. Still, as he walked, his legs aching, he couldn't shake the thought. They weren't just watching. They were tracking. Somewhere, someone had fed Ash's tattoo number into a network. And Clyde's access to that forum, that one mistake, had put him on their radar. But why now? Why care about one effective puppy so much? He stopped beneath a cluster of trees and opened the coat slightly. Ash looked up at him with tired eyes, but wagged his tail faintly. "You're more important than they're letting on, aren't you?" Clyde murmured. There had to be more. This wasn't just about protocol. He remembered the agent's words. He didn't meet early benchmarks, poor fire response, unstable reaction. But Clyde had seen something different. Since the moment he pulled Ash from the ice, the pup had shown something no test could measure. Loyalty, resilience, will, and something else, too, intelligence. Not the kind that barked on command, but the kind that read people, that trusted instinct over order, that was dangerous to people who valued obedience above everything. By noon, Clyde reached a creek that marked the boundary of what locals call Bear Hollow, a no-man's land of rough terrain, steep climbs, and thick undergrowth. Few people hiked it. Even fewer returned. But it led directly to the base of the fire tower. It was his only path forward. Clyde rested for a few minutes under a rock outcrop, letting Ash stretch out on a heated pack. The pup's strength was returning slowly. He could now limp a few steps, his paws scabbing over where the ice had bitten him. As Clyde refilled his canteen, he heard it. Engines. Snowmobiles. 2, maybe 3, coming from the west. They were cutting him off. He grabbed his gear, bundled Ash again, and started up the trail into Bear Hollow. The climb was brutal. The slope curved upward at a sharp angle, rocks hidden under snow, causing near-constant stumbles. Clyde's lungs burned, his breath visible in harsh clouds. Sweat mixed with snow across his brow, blinding him momentarily. But he kept moving, and Ash, warm and still, kept trusting. At one point, as Clyde paused to catch his breath, he whispered, "I used to think I came here to be left alone, but maybe I was waiting for you." The snowmobiles echoed behind them, growing louder. Then silence again. They were close. Clyde scrambled through a thicket and stumbled onto an old logging path. It was nearly invisible now, buried under years of neglect and at least a foot of powder. But he recognized a curve in the trees, the strange angle of the ridge. The tower was less than a mile away. He picked up his pace, almost running now. Then he saw it. Smoke, faint, curling above the treetops. Joanna was already there. Hope surged through his chest like fire, but so did fear, because if she was there, they could be too. He slid down a final slope and burst into the clearing. The fire tower loomed above like a silent sentinel, and beside it the shelter, a squat wooden structure with one small chimney and thick insulated walls. The door swung open as he approached, and there she was, Joanna, older than he remembered, her once dark hair now streaked with silver, but her eyes, sharp and blazing with purpose, hadn't changed. "Clyde," she said, grabbing his arm and pulling him inside. "You cut it close." He stepped into the warmth, collapsing to his knees as Ash wriggled out his coat and lay beside the fire, exhaling like he finally understood he was safe. Joanna closed the door behind them and bolted it. "I counted 3 drones and at least 1 snow unit heading in from the west," she said briskly. "You bought time, but not much." Clyde looked up at her. "What are they really after, Joe?" Joanna hesitated, then knelt beside Ash. She gently touched the pup's head and peeled back his fur near the ear. Underneath was a microchip, not unusual. But then she pointed. "There's a second tag," she said, "deep under the muscle. Not just for ID. This one's coded." Clyde's eyes widened. "What kind of coding?" Joanna looked at him. Neurobehavior mapping. He was part of a covert side project, designed to test adaptive loyalty, without direct command influence. They wanted dogs who could sense threat and respond on instinct, not training. Clyde blinked. "That's not possible." "It is," she said. "They were trying to build instinct-driven protectors. Weapons that could read emotion, react to fear, respond to betrayal. Dogs that knew what to do before they were told." Clyde looked over at Ash. Sleeping. Small. Trusting. "They were trying to play God," he muttered. Joanna nodded. "And when it didn't work fast enough, they buried it. Literally." The knock came again. Louder this time. Then silence. Joanna rose slowly, signaling Clyde to stay down. She moved to the door, her boots silent on the wooden floor. Her hand hovered near the handle, but she didn't open it. Instead, she whispered, "Clyde, under the floor now." Clyde hesitated only a second before scooping up Ash, who had stirred awake with a soft growl, and moved toward the trapdoor beneath the old wood stove. Joanna kicked it open, revealing a cramped crawlspace lined with blankets and emergency supplies. "No matter what happens," she said, eyes fierce, "you don't come out unless I call your name. You understand?" Clyde nodded, then climbed in, cradling Ash close. Joanna shut the trapdoor and rolled the stove back in place, just as a man's voice called from outside. "Dr. Reyes, we know you're in there. Open the door." It wasn't the same voice Clyde had heard back at his cabin. This one was colder, younger, more rehearsed. Joanna took a breath and opened the door crack. Two men stood outside, one in tactical gear, the other in a government-grade windbreaker, bearing a seal Clyde couldn't see from below. They looked clean, clinical, detached, the type who never questioned orders because they never had to face the consequences. "We're looking for a man named Clyde Mathis," the windbreaker said. "We believe he may be transporting government property. Specifically, K9-0734 MN. Joanna arched an eyebrow. "Never heard of him." "You're lying," the tactical one replied. "Satellite imaging confirms movement from his property to this location as of 4 hours ago." "You're wasting your time," Joanna snapped. "Even if I did know Mathis, which I don't, this is a sanctuary. You're not stepping foot in here without a warrant." The agent reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, holding it just high enough to be threatening. "Signed this morning." Joanna snatched it, scanned it, and cursed under her breath. Clyde, still crouched beneath the floor, closed his eyes. Ash pressed closer to his chest, his tiny heartbeat fluttering against Clyde's ribs like a trapped bird. "Then I'll tell you what I told your boss 15 years ago. Joanna growled. "You may have your paperwork, but if you touch one dog in this place, I will go public with everything. Every file, every recording, every unethical experiment you think is buried." There was a pause. "You've been warned," she added. The two agents looked at each other. "We'll be watching," the windbreaker said. Then, to Clyde's amazement, they left. Minutes passed before Joanna rolled the stove back and yanked open a hatch. Clyde climbed out, coughing from the dust, Ash still bundled against him. "They're not leaving for good," Joanna muttered. "Just regrouping. They'll come back tonight. Harder." Clyde looked at her, his face pale. "Then we run again." "No," she said. "There's nowhere left to run." He froze. Joanna paced the room, then finally looked back at him. "They don't just want the pup. They want the experiment gone. All traces. All witnesses. You think they'll let you just disappear with him?" Clyde's throat tightened. "So what do we do?" he asked. Joanna knelt beside Ash, gently rubbing his ears. "We show the world." "What?" "You have footage of the rescue?" Clyde nodded slowly. "Dashcam. On my old trail cam. 2. It caught the moment I pulled him out of the lake." "Perfect," Joanna said. "I've got a satellite relay buried out back. It's off-grid, encrypted. We upload everything. The footage, the medical data, the second implant, the forum logs." Clyde's eyes widened. "That's treason." "It's truth," Joanna said. They worked in silence for hours. Joanna extracted the deep chip from under Ash's shoulder, a delicate procedure that made the pup yelp, but he never snapped, never fought. Clyde held him the whole time, whispering softly, "Just a little longer. Buddy, just a little more." Then they scanned the data. The implant wasn't just a tracker. It had logs, behavior metrics, synapse readings, threat recognition overlays. Ash had been learning far more than they expected. His brain had already begun adapting, mapping emotional resonance to people and situations. He wasn't just reacting. He was evaluating. "It worked," Clyde whispered. "The experiment worked, and they were scared of it." Joanna nodded. "Because instinct isn't controllable. They wanted soldiers, not souls." They uploaded everything to a secure server, then sent the files to 6 news agencies, 2 independent watchdog groups, and a military ethics panel. It was done. They had set the fire. But it also meant the agents wouldn't wait anymore. By nightfall, drones circled overhead again, this time lower, closer, watching. The sound of snowmobiles came back around 9 p.m., like wolves returning to a kill. Inside the cabin, Joanna turned off every light. Clyde loaded Ash into a makeshift sling and strapped him to his chest. "You said we couldn't run." "We're not running," she said. He looked at her. "We're drawing them in." Joanna handed him a flare. 10 minutes after I open the door, fire it. That's your signal to move, northeast, through the ridge. I've cleared a tunnel through the snow. There's a truck waiting 2 clicks out. Headlights off. Key in ignition. It'll take you to the border. Clyde's breath hitched. You're staying? Joanna gave a tight smile. I'm already on every list they have. But you're the one who saved him. You're the story. You get him out. She pulled him into a hug. It was brief, fierce. Then she was gone. Out the door, into the dark. From under the floor, Clyde listened. He heard shouting. Commands. Then silence. He waited. 1 minute. 2. Then he rose, stepped outside and lit the flare. It exploded into crimson above the treetops. Ash stirred in his chest pouch, eyes blinking. We're not done yet, Clyde whispered. You ready? Ash let out a soft sound, half whine, half growl, as if to say, always. Then they ran. Through trees. Through snow. Through history. Toward the one place still left in the world that might let them be free. Clyde froze on the edge of the ridge. Snow whipped against his face, but he didn't feel it. All he saw was a silhouette inside the truck. The familiar face of a man who had stood on his porch days ago, demanding Ash as if he were nothing more than inventory. The man was alone, calm, one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting casually on his knee. The engine idled in a soft purr beneath the hum of wind. Clyde felt his pulse spike. His instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere else to go. Joanna's plan, the encrypted data, the escape route, all of it led here. If this was a trap, there would be no second chance. Ash stirred in his sling, letting out a low growl. Clyde gently ran his hand over the pup's head, then took a step forward. Another. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he approached the door and stopped inches from the window. The man looked at him, then reached over and calmly unlocked the passenger side door. Get in, he said. We don't have time. Clyde didn't move. Where's Joanna? She stayed behind. She's fine. They'll question her, but she'll stall long enough for you to get across. Clyde narrowed his eyes. And you? What's your play in all this? The man gave a tired smile. You still think I'm the enemy. You were. Clyde snapped. I was doing my job, the man replied, until someone upstairs told me the truth. Clyde hesitated. The man's face hardened. Do you really think they would have stopped with Ash? The experiment worked. But it worked in a way they couldn't predict. These dogs weren't just learning obedience. They were learning us, sensing betrayal, reacting to cruelty. That kind of awareness? It's dangerous to people who abuse power. He turned toward Clyde now, voice low. I saw the footage. The lake. The ice. The eyes of that pup. When you pulled him out, I couldn't forget it. And then I saw the reports. How they planned to erase everything. You, Joanna, him. Clyde swallowed hard. I'm not proud of what I did, the man said, but I'm not letting them finish it. He reached into the glow compartment and tossed a file onto the seat. That's your new identity. One for you. One for Ash. New papers. No more tags. No more tracking. Clyde finally opened the door and slid in, never taking his hand off Ash. You're risking everything, he said quietly. The man nodded. So are you. They drove in silence through winding forest roads until they reached the state border. A back access point near an old ranger station long abandoned. The gate had been cut open. Snow had buried the tracks. As they pulled up, Clyde saw another vehicle waiting. A woman stood beside it, face hidden under a scarf, eyes sharp. She gave a short nod. She'll take you the rest of the way, the man said. Clyde turned to him. What about you? I'll go back, he said. Buy time. Feed them the story they want. Long enough for you two to disappear. Clyde reached across the seat and offered his hand. The man looked at it for a moment, then shook it firmly. Thank you, Clyde said. Take care of him, the man replied, nodding toward Ash. I intend to, Clyde said. He stepped out of the truck, Ash still strapped to his chest. The woman waved him over, guiding him to her SUV. As they pulled away, Clyde looked back one last time. The The man in the black coat stood alone, hands in his pockets, watching them disappear into forest. And then he was gone. 3 months later, southwest Texas. The sun was hot and heavy, casting golden rays over an open stretch of land fenced in by cedar posts. Cattle moved slowly in the distance. Birds called overhead. And in the middle of it all stood Clyde, sleeves rolled up, sweat on his brow. He tossed the ball across the yard. Ash, now stronger, faster, and more confident than ever, sprinted after it, his legs no longer limping, his spirit fully restored. He caught it midair, spun on his paws, and raced back, tongue lolling, eyes bright with pride. Clyde knelt down and opened his arms. Ash ran into them without hesitation. "You're not a soldier," Clyde said softly. "You're not a tool. You're mine, and you're free." The ranch belonged to a friend of Joanna's, a quiet man who owed her more favors than he could count. No one asked questions here. No one reported to the state. It was a place where both man and dog could start over. Every night, Clyde wrote. He documented everything, from the rescue on the lake to the chase, to the truth behind the neural implants. He didn't send the stories out. Not yet, but he kept them safe. In time, he knew they would matter. Ash had his own room now, his own name tag, a new chip, one that wasn't connected to any government program, just a small vet clinic in a nearby town. But the most important change? He no longer flinched at wind. He didn't whimper in his sleep. And every morning, he greeted Clyde like it was the greatest moment of his life. Because for Ash, every day was a gift. Every day was a life reclaimed.